I think this might be a moment for me to welcome you all here who are in the room with us. Welcome you to another instalment of the Roderick Centre for Australian Literature and Creative Writing. It's a webinar series that we have been having occasionally with our visiting fellows who have visited us from various places in Australia. Before anything else, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on Irriganti land here on the Cairns campus, a campus that has the Irriganti name of Nomabada, which translates kind of as centre of learning. So it's quite a good terminology to have when we're thinking about these sorts of webinars that we are participating in. The Roderick Centre for Australian Literature and Creative Writing is only a recently established centre. I recognise the Director, Victoria Katainen, who's in the room here, and also myself. I'm a member of the Roderick Centre for Australian Literature and Creative Writing. The Roderick Centre was established through the generosity of Colin and Margaret Roderick. Colin Roderick in particular has been a long-time supporter of Australian literature. The mission of the Roderick Centre is quite simple, but covers a lot of different other organisations like ours to foster the reading and writing of Australian literature in all its forms, and to encourage the study of the broad field of Australian literary and literary cultures. And that broad field is what we celebrate. The centre has a vision, an understanding of Australian literature in its broadest sense that embraces First Nations storytelling, contemporary social matters, and the largely unrecognised stories and storytelling capacity of regional Australia. Some of what Adelle will be talking about fits into that frame. So with the name of Adelle, this is my moment to welcome Associate Professor Adelle Sefton-Rowston from Charles Darwin University. Many of you in the room will know Adelle from, as I'm looking through the names, will know Adelle from various other places. Adelle has been visiting with us here at the Roderick Centre for two tranches of 2 weeks, but she's been here on Nomabada campus with me for the last couple of weeks. Adelle is a senior Fulbright scholar and lectures in literary studies at Charles Darwin University. She teaches creative writing in the Darwin Correctional Precinct, and in 2022 taught in several correctional facilities across Alabama. In 2023, she was a resident with the Bard Prison Initiative in New York. Her research focuses on writing about, for, and within prisons, with the view that these literary archetypes offer new paradigms for justice reform. She is a magazine editor who works to include publications by justice-impacted writers. Her debut book is titled Polities and Poetics, Race Relations and Reconciliation in Australian Literature. I know you've all acted upon the call to join Adelle this afternoon. We need to talk about decolonising prisons is the title and topic of this afternoon's talk by Associate Professor Adelle Sefton-Rowston. Welcome, Adelle.
Thank you so much, Roger, for such a warm welcome. And I'd also like to acknowledge Victoria Kutainen, the Director of the Roderick Centre, and Elizabeth Smythe, who has made my residency here so valuable for connecting with people and learning about stories and the power of these across the regions. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Irrikanji people, whose land I've been visiting for the last 2 weeks, and thank them for their custodianship. This week is an important week to discuss decolonising prisons. It's Reconciliation Week, and it's a time in which we can see how prisons disappear people in the same way in which the policies around the stolen generations also operated. While I am focusing on more positive stories within the prison, just a trigger warning for those who may be disturbed by some of the things that come up as we're talking about trauma narratives as well. But let's begin. There's a prison in far north Queensland where the flowers grow extra big, much bigger than the flowers on the outside. People are very protective of these flowers, and it is an offence to pick them from the garden. There is a prison in South Australia where women from a craft workshop had leftover sunflower seeds and planted them in the prison grounds. When the flowers were about to bloom, the prison staff came and chopped them down. There is a prison in the Northern Territory where berries appear in the yard only once a year. These berries can't be eaten, but the women use them for makeup, piercing the skins of the berries to rub on their cheeks for rouge. Makeup is contraband. There is a prison down south where a creative arts facilitator was approved to bring a packet of Chupa Chups for a workshop. The women were allowed to keep their Chupa Chups at the end of the workshop, but they decided to combine their rainbow lollipops and give them to their friend as a bouquet for her birthday. Prisons are paradoxical places. On the daily, there are acts of kindness and there are acts of spitefulness. I am more interested in stories about acts of kindness to understand who people are and who they might become in a tough on-crime environment. I am collecting stories of beauty in prisons too, and how people take it upon themselves to transform ugly spaces into places for healing. Why are prison stories of beauty, refusal, and kindness important? These are the stories that break through the darkness of our carceral system and shine a light on the persistence of the human spirit, finding hope, building community, and imagining new ways of being beyond their own circumstance. These stories are like delicate flowers, existing in environments where love is contraband and where growing, learning, and elevating is a constant struggle. Acts of kindness have a force to create rather than destroy, and it is creating that will decolonise the systems we have bequeathed without evidence of their success, yet continue to proliferate as if their existence is evidence enough. My investigation into kindness, beauty, and refusal in prisons is inspired by Australian creative performance group Hot Brown Honey. This group work across the arts in theatre, dance, poetry, comedy, circus, and burlesque, and represent global First Nations backgrounds, including Samoan, Tongan, Indonesian, and Maori, and travel the world in solidarity with First Nations and gender-fluid women everywhere to explore identity, exploitation, appropriation, and friendship in a world gone wild in the midst of what they call a creative revolution. When asked how to destroy the patriarchy, they say, shake the foundation, synchronize, organize, mobilize, don't forget to moisturize, because self-care is massive. Their motto, decolonize and moisturize, creatively points to the decolonizing efforts we can all contribute to when we make the world more beautiful, more nurturing, more feminist. Today, I will discuss my prison arts projects that are founded on poetics, literary analysis, storytelling, street art, and graffiti to understand the history and activist nature of the arts in prison and how the very practice of these forms on the inside disrupt the material world of the prison and refuse its colonial design. During my time in Alabama, I learned that while this state had the highest rates of incarceration, it was also potentially the literary capital of the South. There are many famous authors with ties to Alabama. Edward O. Wilson is best known for his ecological contributions. Ralph Ellison is the author of Invisible Man, a novel addressing social and intellectual issues faced by African Americans in the early 20th century. And James Agee, who along with photographer Walker Evans, published Let Us Now Praise Famous Men in 1941, an account of time spent with West Alabama sharecropper families during the Great Depression. And of course, there is Winston Groom, who created the on-the-page character Tom Hanks, brought to life in Forrest Gump. On my first day, I was told, "You must read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson," and a copy appeared on my doorstep during COVID isolation just days later. "You must watch Forrest Gump," my best friend insisted, waving me goodbye at the Darwin airport. And when I got to my desk at Auburn University, there was a pile of Alabama prison arts and education projects anthologies containing students' work from the last 20 years. I was decisive about how I wanted to read these texts, not to understand who criminals are, but instead explore the opposite. If prison was a human book character, who would they be? If they were a character on a quest, how could they transform? To start, I went to one of Alabama's most famous literary works, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. This novel tells the tale of Tomboy Scout, her friend Dill, her father Atticus Finch, and their neighbour Boo Radley. It is a story about dangerous misperceptions, stereotypes, and fast judgments of those around us. But it's also a story about empathy and humanity. Lee writes, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." What is so remarkable about this text is that through a range of personalities within the book, Lee develops a character in such a way that their role in the novel advances the story forward toward its climax and resolution. To Kill a Mockingbird is a real beauty. It invites readers to explore what truly makes a person to be of good character. What are the desirable traits of a character that makes the world a better place, like kindness, honour, and caring for others? Lee asks this against the backdrop of a cruel and racist justice system. Atticus Finch and Scout captivated readers while confronting them with some of the realities of race and justice in the South. What is often overlooked, however, is that the black man Tom Robinson, who was falsely accused of rape, was not successfully defended by Atticus. Tom Robinson is found guilty, and later he dies when, of despair, he makes a desperate attempt to escape from prison. He is shot 17 times in the back by his captors, quote, "dying ingloriously, but not unlawfully." But who are these characters that shoot Tom Robinson? They are nameless, faceless, and go without trial. They are absent of character. I began thinking more about this notion of good character, but instead how it can be applied as a litmus test on the colonial world and its structures. Heroes and villains inform narratives, and in Lee's home state of Alabama, there are people who continue their efforts to understand the complex issues of incarceration and justice reform. And there are those who invest in the villain's pursuit of spitefulness, control, domination, and manipulation. Then I turn to Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy. Just Mercy is a memoir that recalls Stevenson's life work as a lawyer in Alabama and his challenges defending people on death row due to an unfair trial. The main case study Stevenson details in his book is the corrupt framing of Walter McMillan, accused of a murder that was proven he did not commit. Through his Atticus-type pursuit for justice, Stevenson prevents McMillan's execution by electric chair. According to Stevenson, even though Walter had lived in Monroe County his whole life, he had never heard of Harper Lee or To Kill a Mockingbird. Bryan Stevenson has become a famous justice advocate in Alabama. He created the Legacy Museum and Memorial, which documents the history of racial injustice from slavery to lynching to mass incarceration. He writes, So much of our worst thinking about justice is steeped in the myths of racial difference that still plague us. I believe that there are 4 institutions in American history that have shaped our approach to race and justice, but remain poorly understood. The first, of course, is slavery. The racial terrorism of lynching in many ways created the modern death penalty. During the terror era, there were hundreds of ways in which people of colour could commit a social transgression or offend someone that might cost them their lives. Absorbing these psychosocial realities created all kinds of distortions and difficulties that manifest themselves today in multiple ways. His famous TED Talk, "We Need to Talk About an Injustice," is testament to how he was, quote, developing a maturing recognition of the importance of hopefulness in creating justice. Not that pie in the sky stuff, not a preference for optimism over pessimism, but rather an orientation of the spirit. The kind of hope that creates a willingness to position oneself in a hopeless place and be a witness, that allows one to believe in a better future, even in the face of abusive power. That kind of hope makes one strong. In Australia, the increasing rates of incarceration and recidivism are getting worse, particularly if you are an Indigenous Australian. The Productivity Commission reports that various Close the Gap targets to reduce the disparities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in health, education and employment are all improving, except one. Incarceration is going backwards. After 2 Australian Royal Commissions into the state of prisons and the enormous chain of reporting on human rights, the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison is increasing, and the harsh worldview of crime and punishment is persisting in the national imaginary. The representation of prisons in world literature has mostly focused on the harsh realities of their disciplining practices of punishment and corporal control. However, this literature does little to address mass incarceration as a crisis of the imagination, writ large through the dehumanisation of justice-impacted people and increasing recidivism. Thus, my own interventionist research hopes to identify and address a void in Australian prison writing and its analysis by surfacing stories about the creative tactics that refuse the system to cultivate alternative regimes of survival, care, and belonging between people. I argue that without this research, we are unable to repair the crisis of the imagination that persists despite much need for justice reform. As long as there have been prisons, there have been stories about their harsh environments, the crimes of those incarcerated, or the tales of their escape, including Charles Dickens' Great Expectations and Franz Kafka's In the Penal Colony. To this end, there have been many stories representing the harsh realities of incarceration and through dark language, working in visceral ways to remind us of our wounds. Yet perhaps one of these wounds has proven collectively narcissistic for settlers who, through the colonial project, have sought to dominate and control Indigenous people, their land and culture through the extension of Britain's own prison system. By contrast, in recent contemporary Australian fiction, there has been a publishing of works, particularly by Australian Indigenous authors, whose narratives present more utopian visions of what constitutes escape from a penal colony. For example, in his novel Taboo, Kim Scott writes of language survival and self-determined education in prison, while Paul Collis's Dancing Home outlines the importance of connecting with country when challenging the law. Tony Birch's Selected Stories in Common People quite literally maps out a reform to justice graffitied on a cell wall. In 2016, I interviewed Birch as part of the NT Writers Festival, where he shared the story of his family friend dying at the Collingwood police station. Birch spoke of the great psychological harm that impacts service people too, and how these confronting narratives challenge our need for more appropriate human language at times when we are often speechless. However, there does not exist a substantial body of critical work on prison writing in Australia, particularly on writing and practice of justice impacted writers, which without this work and creativity will continue to be overlooked. This has implications for justice impacted people who aspire to become authors, but also for readers stuck in the same prism of reading stereotypes about crime and punishment. While some authors like Mudruru learn to write in prison, there is a lack of scholarly analysis on not only what this writing is about, but what it does. Memoirs may provide real-life accounts about challenges within the justice system and gesture toward initiatives that connect people with their communities. These are the same communities who are wanting better social outcomes such as reduced crime and recidivism. A comprehensive audit of prison writing will not only put this genre on the literary and cultural map, but will invite justice-impacted people into a field of visibility, no longer being forgotten or unseen, but prepared for connection through the power and purpose of transformative narratives. To fill gaps in our knowledge, my project aims to organise world-leading prison writing workshops modelled on the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Principles of Best Practice and the Bard Prison Initiative's Language and Thinking model to develop an Australian-specific practice based on the writing traditions of resistance, reconciliation and sovereignty as decolonial research that challenges the harsh worldview of crime and punishment. My university project, Why Write, a prison education program for the NT, delivers creative arts workshops in Darwin's prison, painting murals and teaching graffiti as poetry. Pedagogy is designed by colleagues Tracy Woodruff, Simon Moss and Berit Zemetz, and is based on 8 Aboriginal ways of learning: story sharing, community links, deconstruct and reconstruct, non-linear, land links, symbols and images, non-verbal and learning maps. A transgressive theme of graffiti is used to engage those resistant to writing, but want to mark the material environment of the prison, to decolonise its visual scapes. For instance, I teach participants creative writing through 3-word poems and 6-word stories. They get a chance to think instead of woe is me to whoa, it's me, or here I am, hear me roar. These poems and prose inspire the artwork for the 7 murals we have painted with the women on the inside. And I'll just stop sharing for a moment to show you actually the mural, one of our murals coming into being. We were able to get permission from the prison to record some of the painting that we did for our first mural. So you'll be able to see how this operates kind of as a moving story. Oops. And just go back to my PowerPoint now. And we should be able to see that now. It's gone back to the start. We even rehearsed this too, didn't we, Roger? Oops. So this is the first mural which we painted for NAIDOC Week to the theme of Voice, Treaty, Truth. And you could see that in the making before. That's the finished product. And Indigenous street artist Shiloh McNamee came in with me for this particular project. She's a street artist in Darwin and helped workshop some of the images while I was workshopping some of the 3-word poems and 6-word stories. And she taught portrait drawing as well at the same time. And so that was the first one. And then we went back the following year and we had enough paint and time to put up 2 more murals. This one's Women Empowering Women. We had some Maori women with us as well, and they worked together to come up with their own theme around the healing hands. And then this one, Strong Women. The women worked together to use some of their own words from Aboriginal languages and put those up on the wall as well. So these particular murals were filmed with music and statements from the women to create a digital representation of decolonising the prison. And with community funding, we projected the digital narratives on a large building in the Darwin city as part of the 2020 Darwin Street Art Festival. This brought the beautiful artwork and expressions to the community where women are returning and was a message writ large, so within, so without. Participants were surveyed at the beginning and end of each program to measure mood and well-being. Interviews were conducted at the end of the programs to collect data on the impacts of the program, and results showed improvements in 3 main areas: self-efficacy, future clarity, and well-being. Important traits considered necessary for building a new life or reinventing oneself beyond the prison. Art reveals the invisible patterns which underpin our own as well as all human development. And here's a quick recording that a colleague and I did with one of the participants, and she's given me permission to share this. But I apologise, it's going to be the clunky de-sharing again and then showing the video.
Conversation about.
There it is, and we go.
About what painting on the wall and what it means to you. So what have you decided to paint?
I've decided to paint pouting lips because resilience to me means like when your baby is upset or crying, they hurt themselves, all you have to do is give them a little kiss where they fell over or hurt themselves, and they feel really, happy, and it's like black magic.
Makes everything better.
Yeah.
And it's always is it always the mums doing the kissing, the lips, so it's very feminine.
Yes, it's very feminine and
a woman's part.
and
Yeah. That's good.
Thank you.
And did you have a quote to go with that as well? Or
Yes, I've made my own little poem sort of thing, just for 2 lines. It says, we are one, but we come together as strong women to come together. And then it says, we are women who can get through any kind of weather.
That's good. And what do you think about everyone else's stuff that they're putting into the wall?
I think it's excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. Everyone's doing positive things and empowering each other, you know, it's like uplifting and very encouraging.
It's good. You're excited to have it projected onto the wall?
Yeah, yes, deadly.
Yeah.
Deadly Anna.
Cool.
Okay, I'll just return to the PowerPoint now. Thanks everyone for your patience. Should be able to see that, but yeah, just let me know. Otherwise, Roger. And we'll keep going. So it is important to decolonise the prison space so that it becomes one of rehabilitation and healing, rather than a perpetuation of the penal colony that does not celebrate people for who they are or their creative gifts. It simply disappears people. This year I developed and facilitated a creative writing workshop in Townsville with Indigenous collaborator Yvette Holt, Director of the First Nations Australia Writers Network. In this photo here is renowned poet Coralie Cassidy, who shares the ways in which elders inside support people in prison. She publishes poetry anywhere she can, anthologies, local newspapers and books to address important issues. Subsequent workshops hope to contribute to a growing genre of prison writing to the fore in Australia by analysing how stories from the inside operate as powerful narratives that challenge stereotypes of incarcerated people and redirect state-driven public policy dependent on traditional representations of crime and punishment. In Australia's tough on crime environment, the project aims to identify how closing the gap is dependent on addressing mass incarceration as a crisis of the imagination and will result in social and cultural benefits by providing broader definitions of decolonisation in a vital new chapter towards understanding our incarceration nation through literature, and with that, support the vital ongoing role of literature to help us imagine who we are and might become. An inclusive range of genres, voices and life experiences of incarcerated people will inform broader institutional points of view on the role of aesthetic and creative practices for justice reform. To achieve this aim, the project pivots on three key research questions. 1, to promote alternate perspectives as decolonial research. How is the experience of prison represented in Australian literature, and what does the inclusion of life writing tell us about the possibilities of justice reform? 2, how has Australian literature captured the articulation of care and community in carceral spaces? And 3, how can an underappreciated form of life writing and testimonials of prison life move the tradition of Australian literary studies forward so that stories of incarceration might challenge what Griffiths calls the narcissistic settler imagination, which is incapable of seeing beyond its own self-projections. History shows that the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prison results in the penal system as not only a place of punishment, but as a means of cultural erasure. The publishing work of justice impacted writers that this research will facilitate will help to revert this erasure, making a person visible to their community as a person and as a creative artist who contributes to the purpose of art and culture. We know writing is meaningful for connection because often so many incarcerated people fulfill their urgent need to write or get a message across by graffitiing on walls in prison. For example, the industry of dark tourism sees people come from far and wide to read text on the wall of Alcatraz or words in activist spaces like the Casma Valley in Peru or Nevada's Peace Camp. These so-called illegitimate markings sometimes reflect First Nation sovereignty and point to a decolonial turn, an intellectual movement concerned with the more practical implications of turning the world into something new, not just ideologically, but materially new. Elevating the narratives of justice-impacted people captures their realities to inform a cluster of interdisciplinary discourses such as sociology, criminology, and education that are in pursuit of practical measures that provide better outcomes for incarcerated people by turning hearts and minds towards something new. Exploring carceral arts as a polemical discourse is the first solution to disrupting the master narratives of a penal colony, so it too can reflect on itself and move towards a decolonial turn in justice reform. As far back as 1861, Charles Dickens presented readers with an alternative narrative representing the ill treatment of prisoners in his novel Great Expectations. This novel projected the expectation that those deemed criminal could still do good for others, leaving readers wondering whether the prisoner in this story was indeed the benefactor of Pip's inheritance. In 1914, Franz Kafka's story in the penal colony went further to point to what constitutes unfair processes in society and did so through a dystopian vision of justice. In his story, a brutal machine is used for the execution of a man without fair trial, where only this man can decipher the words with his wounds. According to Winston, Kafka urges us to read only the texts that wound us, books that allow us to reflect deeply and with feeling, to inspire positive changes to the material world. To this end, there have been many stories representing the harsh realities of incarceration and through dark language working visceral ways to remind us of our wounds. As Griffiths notes, the challenge with facing a narcissistic wound, that is, one that evokes shame and threatens superiority, is to identify colonial egoism through reimagining arts and culture. As previously mentioned, there exists a number of contemporary Australian fiction works, particularly by Indigenous authors, presenting contrasting narratives of escape from a penal colony. These trauma narratives are confronting and make it difficult to imagine the possibilities of joy in justice work. It is vital, however, to contribute these testimonies to the literature of the country and share stories to reflect upon while continually responding to the texts that wound us. Similarly, building the archives with prison narratives that, by contrast, may inspire, engage, and connect us beyond the grim views and practices of the penal colony is equally as important in this decolonial work of new vision making. The Why Write Kindness project uses the story capture method to begin building a repository of beauty, refusal, and kindness as a counter-narrative to punishment and tough on crime. I am travelling around Australia talking to anyone who has anything to do with prisons, asking what kindness looks like on the inside and what it does. Creative writing workshops have hence been the beginning of a practice and a source of study that includes interviews and yarning circles. The aim here is to creatively find ways to reconstitute carceral experiences through moving stories of resilience, beauty, refusal, kindness, and solidarity between groups such as women in prison. Women are the fastest growing prison population in Australia, yet to date they are the least represented in carceral narratives from authors mentioned Scott, Collis, and Birch. Indeed, the increasing rate of incarcerated women is a global phenomenon that other incarcerating nations such as the United States are grappling to understand and effectively respond to. The interviews have so far been semi-structured and conducted with JCU criminologist, pictured here, Associate Professor Glenn Dawes. The project has human ethics approval at Charles Darwin University, and in our interviews we ask questions such as, can you share a time when someone showed you kindness while you were incarcerated? How did it affect you? How do you balance the need for self-preservation with the desire to be kind to others? And how do you think kindness can influence the dynamics within the prison community? We recently interviewed a correctional officer with 35 years in their job and asked them what kindness looked like among prison staff. They explained how things had changed over their 35 years in the role and that they'd seen the prison move from a prison system to a correctional system. They said that kindness could be seen as the absence of violence and the inclusion of more humane aspects that made it more livable, like airflow and ventilation. They could not, however, think of any acts of kindness they'd witnessed between correctional officers and those incarcerated. Their definition of kindness in prison was solely the support services that sometimes visited the prison, a chaplain, a workshop facilitator, a counsellor. When the people accessed support programs, the officers could then observe who was really struggling and take their needs seriously. In an interview with an Indigenous elder offering a leadership program for women in prison, they said workshops they'd facilitated were for women of any cultural background, and everyone helped each other to learn the importance of code switching. When asked how they defined kindness in prison, they said it was not judging people as a number, but valuing them for their own unique gifts, while acknowledging that together they were all dynamite. Respect often came up as a synonym for kindness, and that respect meant everyone is important. During this interview, we both shared an experience of running workshops for women inside and seeing members of the group discover their family backgrounds. In my own experience facilitating a yarning circle with Indigenous colleagues last year, a young woman shared how she was displaced and didn't really know her Indigenous family background or have a skin name. The women in the group helped her work backwards with their kinship knowledge, and by the end of the workshop, the young lady left with a family identity and a skin name. It was the kindness of the women that gave the workshop true meaning, and it became of relational value to the women. Unfortunately, the leadership program I mentioned before has been cut of its funding. And this is unfortunately a common story, and programs within the prison are short-lived and come and go. This is alarming, considering that according to the correctional officer just mentioned, programs are the only visible evidence of kindness, at least to the staff. In 2017, a man in Berrima prison wrote to me about the value of having educational programs in prison. He had heard from the teacher running the anger management program in prison that I was wanting to start a creative arts program in Darwin Correctional Centre. He wrote to me giving me permission to share this letter with others. 7 years, he says to himself, and at that moment, a small silver rectangular speaker above his head comes to life and barks his name. The sound of a tin can echoing through his cell. He simply replies, yes. He's been awake for hours, just listening to the silence and waiting for the darkness to fade. In essence, he's been waiting for years. The tin can with the echoing robotic voice says, pack up your cell. At first, he's confused. He knows the routine. He has to. It's become a part of his life. Though this is different. But within a second comes understanding. You're going to solitary confinement, the tin can says. Bullshit, he replies. It's bye day. Silence. There is no reply, no explanation. But he doesn't need one. He's been waiting for this. He doesn't move, not yet. He knows unlock isn't for another hour at least, and so he lies still, lost in memories that have turned to nothing but shadows. It's been years since he's been to solitary, but even then it wasn't for long, not like this. It's a sad place, he knows that, though he's not angry, not anymore, only tired. He sits up and looks out through the black iron mesh that covers his cell window. It's a new prison. They only finished building it a couple of years ago. But what he sees isn't anything new, only fences and walls, walls and fences. The last few weeks have been the hardest he's probably ever dealt with, harder even than when the judge first asked him to stand. That was just before his 24th birthday. He's 30 now. What a waste. He pulls his gaze from the rows of fences and looks around at his cell. His life. So sad, he thinks to himself. He stands and begins organising the few possessions he owns to be packed into his pillowcase. They don't mean much except for his letters, though there is one item that is special. It's a book, and in it, he read that words could save a life. This is my life. My name is Max, and as I write, I am still in prison. I needed change. I needed to find words that were tangible, words I could see and hold, words that held proof to what I wanted, simple words to be placed into simple sentences that held the power to change a moment from bad or the possibility of disastrous to something peaceful. I know and always knew in my heart that I would never stumble across a book or a spoken word that could change my life. I've realised, though, through these past years, that change needed to be a choice, a decision, a commitment, a need to be free, to always be free, not just in body, but in spirit. For years, I have been held within the confines of a state of mind. Prison has only really been the embodiment of that. I have found that the true jail has been the hold violence in my life has had upon me and how it has directly led to years of pain and loneliness. The past has come and gone, and with it some of the best years of my life. I blame myself, but more so I blame the hold violence has had upon me. And so 3 weeks after getting out of solitary confinement, I was lucky enough to find myself in the first ever AVP workshop in Darwin Prison. It was fun and a chance for me to get out of the block. I laughed and I made friends. But just as importantly, I saw and held words in my hands that held within them a peaceful path I could follow, the beginning of a journey. I remember walking back to my block after the final day of the first basic workshop. I remember feeling happy. I had finished something. I remember thinking with a smile across my face, perhaps words can save a life. Max. So far, I have collected over 10 stories of beauty, refusal, and kindness in prisons, ranging from community football teams, going inside to play the men's team, those inside growing gum trees for planting koala homes on Magnetic Island, donations of books, toiletries, and vitamin D for people not getting enough sunlight, programs being offered on understanding brain injuries, animal refuge projects, and how to keep culture strong by learning traditional dance. I'll return now to my flight home from Alabama, where I sat next to a young man who, towards the end of the flight, got his phone out to make a list in his notes. The heading read, "What Love Is." Perhaps the greatest form of activism is to be a living example of the type of people you'd like to see walking this earth. I was watching my movie, something my best friend recommended. I was up to the part where Forrest Gump says, "I am not a smart man, but I know what love is." He's a man of great character. If he was the character of a prison in a book, I reckon he'd leave a legacy where kindness is normal, respect automatic, and patience the standard. Thank you. And so, yeah, I'll just leave up my contact details. There is a blog there about my project which needs updating. That's my professional Instagram page where I'm kind of documenting my travels and different things over the course of this work. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you as well if you've got your own stories of kindness in prisons or justice areas as this work develops and unfolds. But yeah, really happy, I think, to take questions now.
So I'm monitoring the chat for you, Adelle. So if anybody wants to put a question in the chat, I'll relay it to Adelle. But feel free to turn on your microphone and ask a question if you would like. I might start then. I'm intrigued by the way that some of the ways in which the poetry that's created in prisons is shared, like particularly the murals, and it's like a form of publication in public for all sorts of passers-by. I wonder if you could just say some more about the example that you've been a part of, and other ones that you've seen in your travels as that kind of alternative form of publication, like graffiti. I guess it's another part of the expression to the public, or the public-facing expression of these important ideas.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, I think that's a really important comparison to make, because the murals and the poetry and prose on the walls in Darwin Correctional Centre, they get a lot of readership. There are 100 people in the women's prison, but then directly opposite where the murals are is the high security men's prison, and they're in their cells 20 hours a day, but can see the murals from their windows. Before we did that, I think I counted about 80 of these kind of orange concrete walls. And so, we've only painted or published across 7 of them. And the aim was to keep going. But since I've heard that there's a plan to get the women out of the main prison, which I think is a very good idea, given that it's right next to it's within the men's prison itself. So there are all sorts of issues with that. And I think in moving them out will create possibilities to think about reinventing that space, so it is one of healing rather than punishment. Boredom, ugliness, brokenness, all of those things that kind of project onto a person that they're not worthwhile. So yeah, I think the publication of the works on the walls is important, and there was a woman inside that we workshopped with to publish a short story in Borderlands magazine. That was all handwritten, so we had to do that labour to get it typed and in for publication. But I think what's amazing about murals in prison is that it is actually disrupting the material space of the prison and making it something else, something new.
Penny Holiday might have a question that sort of builds on that. Are you supported by the prison administration in any of these initiatives? Is it possible your workshops could be adopted on a more regular basis in the Australian context?
Yeah, I think anything to do with corrections I've found takes a really long time, not just administrative processes to actually be able to go inside and have security clearances, but building relationship with correctional staff is important. And what I learned from Kai Stevens, who's the director of the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project, she talks about, she says there's one secret, and that is that you don't no, what it says, she says something like, there's one rule in Fight Club, you don't mention Fight Club. And so there's ways in which you have to protect your project, so you can get access to the prison. So, you know, that means following rules, abiding by procedures and protocols, which doesn't really feel that activist at times. You know, it can be a very submissive process, but it is believing in the work that happens, you know, on the ground and with the women, and giving them opportunities to be with one another in a space that is creative, which is relational, and creates these beautiful moments where they can, you know, be who they are. So that's what we advocate for, through, of course, following procedures and making sure that we can get access through corrections. I'd love to see the project be adopted elsewhere. So if people were interested in contacting me for more details and ideas of how they can, you know, create something in their own areas, I think that would be marvelous, that we could actually start a string of creative arts projects in prisons everywhere.
There's a few questions in the chat, but Victoria has a few comments in the question. Victoria, turn on your mic and camera and fire away.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Adele. Actually, I think maybe you should take the other question first, if that's all right. I feel like I've had open access to Adele. So if there are other questions like Kelly Lee and Joanne first, I would love for those to be answered first. I'm happy to go after if there is still time.
Thanks, Victoria. So Kelly Lee Hickey has asked, could you please give us some more insight into what the prison guard might have been referring to when he spoke about the facilities changing from a prison to a correctional facility?
So in the 35 years of working within prisons, he'd seen more access to support services, is what they'd mentioned. That before that, and he'd said something along the lines of people were just there to exist in the prison system, and that the role of the guards was to just ensure that, you know, people were existing. And then in a new phase of these prisons becoming correctional facilities, there was some flexibility of programs, and what evolved was this idea of prison education. So this is kind of, you know, the psycho educational programs that the prison itself offers. But the services that come in, that's slightly different. That's education in prison. So in this work, I've found that people like to distinguish themselves from being either prison educators, that, you know, they're employed by the prison to run programs for prison education, or there are people who are educators on the outside and they bring their classrooms inside the prison. What the Bard Prison Initiative does is an inside-out program. So they offer their college units in the same way on the inside, and they bring their mainstream students into the classroom on the inside. So they're breaking down the walls in that way, and establishing a classroom in which everyone is equal, incarcerated or free. And they're quite literally bringing their education program inside the prison. So I guess, yeah, there's been movement over the years in that space. And what that prison guard had mentioned as well is that more of an emphasis on human rights and making a place more livable, you know, as small a gesture as it might seem about airflow and ventilation, that can do a lot for people's even frame of mind, their mental health, to get access to, you know, just more kind of human amenities.
I'm just going to pass on Joanne Bentley-Davies' comment to you, Adele. I'm not sure if you can see the comments there, but
No, I can't, sorry.
Thank you for doing this work. I just love how you are focused on kindness and expressive strategies of storytelling. I've been privileged to work with Auntie Coralie in the youth justice system. Humanising the criminal justice is possible. Apply knowledge of trauma, restorative approaches. As you said, the focus is not on rehabilitation. There's so much evidence on what works. The Hawaiian system completely flipped their approach and now has no young women incarcerated. It is political will. I love this work and admire your commitment to this project.
Oh, thank you so much. That's it's really inspiring to hear that work that you're doing as well. And Coralie is really active in this space with the elders inside. They go in every Wednesday, run different programs. And when she showed up for our workshop, she had a published book by one of the poets on the inside that she'd been working with for years, who had come out and had a draft collection of all these poems that they'd been writing over years, serving a very long sentence. And it was just wonderful to see that this could come into the publication of a book.
Well, there's a question here that might mean a bit more contact between you and Rosamund Thorpe. May I pass on your contact details to a woman friend who spent 10 months in prison last year and might be interested in sharing her experience of kindness in prison with you?
Yes, please. That would be invaluable. Yeah, early stages of this newer project. But as time goes on, you know, more data means, of course, we can come up with more solutions and really better understandings, and more things out in the world which will influence policy makers, those who are working in corrections. You know, this work can happen through the power of storytelling.
Thank you. She's out of prison now, but I think writing about might help her heal from the PTSD that she carries with her now.
Absolutely. I think there are great therapeutic values to writing as well, to make meaning of your time, and create, you know, wisdom from wounds. That is the healing process. And from the interview I did with the lady running the leadership program, she said, you know, that's where she had seen the most progress with people, is finding forgiveness of oneself and of others. So yeah, that can only happen, I think, through deep reflection, which writing and storytelling allows for.
Thank you. I'll pass on your details.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rosamund. Victoria, there is some space for you to ask your question.
Thank you so much, Adele. That was such an inspiring talk. I love hearing the work that you're doing in this space. I think there's so much to admire about it, and it says a lot about you as a researcher and a person. I'm apologizing in advance because this is a commentary question, and really that isn't because I want to stand and say things. It's because I'm still forming my thoughts and they're a little bit incoherent. But my PhD supervisor, Alan Lawson, when I came to Australia, actually, to study post-colonialism at the University of Queensland, always taught me that post-colonialism is characterized by what he called repetitions and reversals. I don't think this was his sort of idea. I think he got it from someone else, but he would say, like, for instance, like in the post-colony, it's quite common that, you know, for instance, the oppressed become the oppressors. You know, the structure doesn't go away. It just repeats throughout the colony and the post-colony. And that's just one example, for example. But I was thinking when you were talking, and it's never really occurred to me before, how brilliant it is that you're thinking through the idea of the penal colony in the present day as not something that is an artifact of the past, but which extends into the present, that continues to be repeated and repeated. And I was thinking how deceptive it is that you know, people tend to think that America which was Britain's first penal colony, I think, and Australia are now places of freedom, right? Like that's that reversal. And how difficult it is for people to imagine that these places that are so characterized by freedom could possibly be places that are actually the opposite of that, in ways that you are, I think, articulating really powerfully. But I was also thinking about how the denial of that is so persistent, and it ricochets in so many spaces, right? Like in the discourse around freedom and oppression, whether that's feminism, you know, like what are women complaining about? You're free now. But I was also thinking about the policing of space, not just geographical space, but I was thinking literary space, for example. You know, we think everyone has open access to expression now. We think everyone can freely express themselves because there's the internet. Isn't it a great place of freedom? When actually, I think what your work is showing is that's totally not the case. And you're making a space for the people in our societies that have the most denial of that access to expression. That really says something about our society, both in America and Australia. You know, that kind of exception that proves the rule. My question, and this is where I say, I'm sorry, I think there's a question here, is around the place that you're making at the intersection between creative writing and Australian literature, and maybe even at the edges of what literature is. You know, I see a lot of our dear colleagues from social work here, for example. And I think historically people would have thought, oh, this isn't literary studies, this is social work, or this is, you know, something else. And I've thought about these kinds of projects before too, and I thought how difficult it is to do historical work in this place, because these voices have been so silenced in the past, right? Like, and it's really important that creative writing goes into that place now to show Australian literature what it could be. So I don't know what question I have except for to ask you, do you experience any kind of pushback from people who are like, this isn't literary studies, or, you know, that kind of policing of space in the wonderful space that you're working in now?
Thanks, Victoria, for that question and really articulating the repeat and reversal. These are tactics, I think, that we're learning of oppressors, and we see it all over the world, that we're presented with something that looks fresh and new, and it's actually just a repeat of the old. And so that intersection between creative writing and literary studies, I think, is really the cutting edge of where we decide what is old, what is really new. And some of the older, kind of more established journals, trying to break into those with this research has been a challenge, because they are representing research around literature with a capital L that we talk about, and pushback around, well, is this quality writing? But using the theme of graffiti kind of opened up for women just to share their ideas. Even with low literacy, there was absolutely no pressure to get things, you know, to spell words correctly, to have neat handwriting. All of those conventions were left outside of the room. It really did just become about the expression of ideas, someone writing their own life. And that really is, I think, important to what comes of literary studies in the future, where, you know, we can say, well, literature has a purpose in helping us understand who people are, you know, not just people who have mastered English and read fancy books, but people who have really important lived experiences and can teach us a lot about who we are and the culture that we've inherited, and how to transform, change, and move forward.
I'm just going to, so I don't think Anthony's with us anymore. It was kind of a farewell message, but also thanks and an offer to talk to you more about the storytelling through printmaking project that he and others are doing at Lotus Glen.
Excellent. No, I definitely take up Anthony's offer there, and he's a member of our Lab North group, which is a collective of researchers who are really interested in the power of narratives and the creative arts across the regions, Cairns, Darwin, Townsville, and Broome. And so we'll really be putting the spotlight on the creative arts as a way in which we can make our cities more livable and better places of connection for people.
I've got no more questions in the chat. If there are no more questions from the floor, it's always one of these moments. If there are no more questions, we are at 5:15, so we've done really well with our hour and a half. This might be an opportunity to just make a bit of noise for Adelle. Turn on your microphones and give Adelle Sefton-Rowston a round of applause, please.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just overwhelmed by the numbers in the room, and really thank you for taking out the time today to hear about the research and the stories of these women. You know, they're not my stories. They're the stories of people who have faced struggles in our colonial system. And yeah, the more we can amplify their stories, I think the more impact we can have on people who may not be ready to hear them yet.
All right. Thanks very much, Adelle. It's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure having you here with us. Thanks to everybody who has attended this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you all sometime in the future. Thanks.